Big news in North Carolina politics as two-term U.S. Senator Thom Tillis has announced he is not running for re-election. Joining me to talk about all of the implications of this announcement, Donna King, who is the editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal, along with being the executive vice president of the John Locke Foundation. Donna, this is big political news.
It is. It is really big news. It's not just North Carolina news. This has made national news over the last several hours, of course. The biggest thing, one, is that it leaves an open seat here in North Carolina for the US Senate, which is, very, very tight race likely to happen. And there's already names being tossed around for a potential replacement for Senator Tillis in that open primary now. There's been some rumblings that there was going to be a difficult primary season for Tillis. That said, it did actually catch me a little bit by surprise that he made this decision. But he says it really was not a hard choice, that he wanted to spend time with his family, and he really had divisive, what he was seeing as a divisive culture and atmosphere on Capitol Hill.
You mentioned the surprise factor, and I think all of us are at least somewhat surprised. But then once you think about it, in retrospect, maybe not a surprise because this was going to be a really tough re-election battle for Thom Tillis.
It really was. I mean, he had a very narrow win in 2020 with Cal Cunningham, and that race was really came down to the wire. And these are really, really tight numbers and lots of fundraising. One of the most closely watched, most expensive Senate races. 2026 was bound to be very, very similar. There's even been talk that maybe former Governor Roy Cooper might jump in for the Democrats, and that would be a very difficult race. Our poll at Carolina Journal has found that Tillis's approval rating, south of 26%. Here in North Carolina, and other polls have shown that Cooper might lead him by even if it's just a point or two.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the polling and also the fact that this is going to be a really tough re-election battle for Thom Tillis had he decided to do it. As I've been reflecting on this, there seem to be a number of challenges, and probably starting with the fact that you really can't identify who is Thom Tillis's electoral base right now. If you look at the pro-Trump faction within the Republican Party, which is the bulk of the Republican Party, they're not fans of Thom Tillis because of the times that he has strayed from Donald Trump's agenda, most recently on that vote on the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, but on other occasions as well. Longtime conservative activists in North Carolina have not been big fans of Thom Tillis over the years, going back to his earliest days on a statewide stage. They have not been big fans. When he ran for the Senate the first time, he was not the first choice among the really activists within the Republican Party. So he doesn't have that base. The much smaller sliver of the Republican Party that is the anti-Trump faction, they might have coalesced around Thom Tillis, but they aren't big fans of his because he has been with the president on enough occasions and has said good things about the president on enough occasions that really wouldn't make him a strong candidate among the anti-Trumpers. Then, of course, Democrats want a Democrat to be in there, and they'll especially want a Democrat if it's Roy Cooper. And then if you look at the moderates, the unaffiliateds, the people who could swing an election one way or the other, maybe they would go for Thom Tillis. But if he had to win a primary and spell out his conservative credentials, that might have soured the middle of the road people on him. So it was really hard to identify a Thom Tillis voting base.
It really is. I mean, it's kind of in a can't win situation. It seemed like just because, he really is stuck between a Republican base that is fiercely loyal to Trump and then Democrats who are just eyeing his vulnerability and looking for a spot to put a Democrat in that seat and claim it for their side. So it is difficult. And he has, I mean, statistically, he's voted with the Trump administration about 90% of the time. But there were some key votes that got a lot of attention, like this one. He said a lot of good things about the Big Beautiful Bill, but he had some concerns about Medicaid, particularly since North Carolina expanded Medicaid in 2023, adding on 600,000 or more folks to that federal entitlement program. So he had some concerns about how that money was being spent or not spent in the big beautiful bill. But he really split from the White House on things like executive authority to impose tariffs and some of these other things. The Pete Hegseth, if you remember it, now that seems like it was so long ago. But the conflict over his appointment to Secretary of Defense. So there have been some really high profile splits from the White House, even though he has voted along with the Trump administration's policies and agendas in most of the cases.
You referenced a little bit earlier the statement that he put out, and I found it very interesting. It could have been very short, saying, I want to spend time with my family and I'm going to spend the rest of my time serving the people of North Carolina. And he said those things, but he also went into some great detail about being happy with his conservative work, leading the tax reform efforts when he was the state house speaker and helping to pass the original Trump tax cut bill the first time that Donald Trump was in the White House. But then he also talked about some of the bipartisan measures, the eugenics compensation in North Carolina, some of the other things that he had done on Capitol Hill in a bipartisan fashion. And then to me, the part that really struck me most about that statement was the fact that he did not take aim at President Trump. He didn't really say anything bad about President Trump, but he did criticize the people within the Republican Party while also alluding to some people in the Democratic Party who would fall into the same type of camp, but really criticizing those within the Republican Party who were not willing to accept any defection or even any questioning of things coming out of the Trump administration. He basically said, that's not the way I operate. I operate in a way that's working across the aisle, being bipartisan, questioning. And in fact, a lot of the things that Thom Tillis has done have basically been in the camp of a member of Congress acting as a member of Congress and not just deferring to the executive, which for a lot of people who have been traditionally conservatives, they'd say that's what Congress should do. Congress should be a check on the executive and saying, well, wait a minute, some of these things might not be as good as they're being touted to be. But Tillis was saying in this statement that you can't operate when no one within the party is going to accept any defection at all from the Trump administration.
Sure. In fact, that's one of the things he said in the statement that he was most proud of was his ability to reach across the aisle and compromise and be pragmatic in his approach to legislating. He even referred to the danger involved with the recent assassination of another lawmaker in another state in Minnesota, and said, look, we see what happens when the extremes take over. It can be very dangerous, and that I'm proud of that role of being able to work with my colleagues on the other side and on some key pieces of legislation. It is interesting that he said the thing that jumped out at me actually though was the part he put at the very end. He said, look, I am excited about being free from fundraising and worrying about 2026, and I'll be able to call balls and strikes the way I see them for the next 18 months, which tells me he has a plan for the next 18 months, and he is definitely not going to change his pattern of calling those balls and strikes and not going along with the White House when he feels like he can't.
And that could end up being a headache for the Trump administration on other fronts. But I would say that there is one piece of this that's good news to some extent for the Trump administration, but to a greater degree for the Republican Party, and that is the timing. I mean, I think everyone would expect that the timing of this has to have something to do with the fact that President Trump came out so forcefully after Thom Tillis's vote on the big beautiful bill and said, I'm looking into primarying Thom Tillis, and I'm going to talk to the people who are going to run against him in a primary. That, of course, now not an option. But I think the good news for the Republican Party is that Thom Tillis didn't drag this out into the fall or even worse into December when candidates are filing and at that point decide I'm not going to run. By deciding now at the end of June with still plenty of time for candidates to try to get into the race, get some fundraising machines, getting the big backers behind them. I think that does give Republicans enough time to coalesce around another candidate if they're able to do that.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things that he leaves the party with, and this is plenty of time and money to go and get another candidate completely prepared, run a full, fair primary. And that's something that Democrats were very highly criticized for at the presidential race last time. So I think in this case, he's like, look, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right now and give my party a chance to come up with some candidates. And there's already been a lot of names flying. Pat Harrigan, Congressman Harrigan's name has been brought up. We saw an interesting tweet from even from Luke Farley, the labor commissioner, saying he'd be happy to help work with selecting some good candidates for this. So it is, I think you're absolutely right. The timing of this is critical for the health of the Republican Party in trying to keep that seat. Jason Simmons, chairman of the NCGOP, tweeted or put a post out today saying that he feels confident that the Republicans will be able to hold on to that Senate seat in 2026, and he wished Tillis the best in his retirement.
You mentioned the possibility of Pat Harrigan, a new member of Congress. I've also seen another new member of Congress is named Brad Knott, the chairman of the National Republican Party, who was a former Republican Party chairman in North Carolina, Michael Whatley. We've seen his
Sure.
name, some others that are coming out. I think one thing that is a challenge for North Carolina is unlike on the Democratic side, where you say the big kahuna out there is Roy Cooper. And if
Right.
he gets in, that's going to be great news for Democrats. You don't have someone on the Republican side who
Sure.
is that equivalent. There's not someone who you look to and say, Tillis isn't running, we've got to get candidate X. There
Right.
are a number of people out there who could be potentially good candidates, but none of them who already have the built-in fundraising base, that have the high name recognition and high favorability among Republicans. So while it's helpful for them that Thom Tillis made this decision now, it is going to be difficult for them to fairly quickly get someone else who's the new candidate. And a big challenge that we often see for Republicans is that you don't see as much among Democrats is rallying around one candidate and saying, this is our guy or our gal, and now let's push that person. You often see Republicans have three or four different credible candidates jump in, fight among each other, and then they're damaged and bruised at the end of the primary season. I'm
Sure.
guessing everyone would like to avoid that this time if they can.
I would think so. Damaged, bruised, and broke. I mean that's really what we see all the time. Republicans have a very much everybody in the pool strategy for primaries. Democrats are really good at clearing the field for their chosen candidate so that the money remains very focused on the general election. But you're right. We're seeing lots of names. We're only seeing just a handful out of the Democrat side because Governor Cooper is so strong, so well known, and such a strong fundraiser. On the Republican side, I think that there's a wide range of potential candidates for this who could emerge through this process. But you're right, there's not one outstanding. I've heard Aaron Pare's name pop up, a few others, but there are a lot of young Republicans who are interested in a seat like this. And truth be told, I really think that this process has started well before today. A lot of folks starting to investigate trying to primary Tillis. I think we're going to see more of that. We've got two candidates that are declared, neither of which have strong name recognition so far, but I think we're going to see a lot more in the coming weeks.
Well, and it's certainly a different ball game for the Republicans now because even if you thought Thom Tillis was not the right person for the job, and if you thought that it would be hard for him to win a general election in 2026, it is tough for a Republican who wants to be a loyal Republican to primary an incumbent two-term member of the Senate. Now, with Tillis taking himself out of this certainly makes it easier for someone who might be interested in this race to get in there without having the downside of being involved in a primary of trying to knock out a sitting incumbent.
Sure, sure. And there's going to be a lot of national attention on this race. I mean, you're going to see a lot of national Republican groups try to come in and pad the coffers of some of the fundraising efforts of any new candidate, because Tillis's race was the most expensive in the country, I believe, 2 cycles in a row. So they're used to pouring a lot of money into this one, and now that they've gotten a lot more runway to get those candidates vetted and really do the background and those kind of things and get that fundraising numbers up, I think we'll see this is going to be a really closely watched race nationally.
As we wrap this up, Donna, what are going to be the things that you and your staff at Carolina Journal are going to be following very closely as we move forward?
Certainly, any emerging candidates, primary candidates, and also what's the reaction from the base? Because what we're really seeing over the last week or two, and really even the last month, was some criticism of Tillis, but he's also been a powerful, influential senator for North Carolina. And what's next for him? He says it's family and grandchildren, but I find it hard to believe that we can really count him out because he's been so influential for 25 years here in North Carolina.
Very much so. Donna King is the editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal, executive vice president of the John Locke Foundation. You could follow all of the coverage of the Thom Tillis story and the U.S. Senate 2026 race that just had this new major development at carolinajournal.com. Donna, thanks so much.
Thank you.